Hello, my beautiful Leo. I'm really glad you found your way here today. Before we begin, just take a slow breath with me. Allow yourself to settle into this moment, because the energy surrounding your reading feels unusually quiet. Not empty, just quiet in the way a heart becomes quiet when it's carrying something it has wanted to say for a very long time. As I begin shuffling, the first card that gently reveals itself is the Page of Cups. It almost feels as though someone has been rehearsing a conversation over and over inside their own mind. They've imagined every possible version of what they could say to you, every possible reaction you might have, and somehow none of those imagined moments have ever felt safe enough. They aren't struggling because they don't care. If anything, they may care far more than they've allowed themselves to admit. Then the Moon card slowly comes forward, and everything around this connection begins to feel softer, almost dreamlike. There are emotions that have been hidden beneath the surface for so long that even this person has started questioning them. They've become so used to pretending everything is fine that wearing the mask almost feels natural now. But beneath that calm expression is someone who keeps replaying memories of you when no one else is around. Yeah. It's almost like they keep returning to moments they thought they had already forgotten. A certain conversation, the way you smiled without trying, the silence that somehow said more than words ever could. Those memories don't seem to leave them. They simply wait in the background until another quiet night brings them back again. The Eight of Swords appears next, and the atmosphere changes. I don't see someone trapped by you. I see someone trapped by their own fears. Every time they think about reaching out, another voice tells them they're too late. Every time they imagine telling you how they truly feel, another thought whispers that maybe you've already closed that chapter. And honestly, that's what scares them more than anything. They're not afraid of loving you anymore. They're afraid you no longer have room in your heart for them. Okay, that realization feels incredibly heavy, because there is a difference between hiding feelings and realizing you've waited so long that the opportunity itself might have slipped away. That possibility has been sitting on their chest, making every day feel a little heavier than the last. Then, almost unexpectedly, the Judgment card rises into the reading, and something inside this energy begins to awaken. Not because everything has suddenly become easy, but because carrying the truth has become harder than speaking it. It's like their own heart has finally reached the point where silence no longer feels like protection. Silence has become the burden. I keep sensing someone standing at the edge of a conversation they can no longer avoid. They may not know exactly what words they'll choose. They may still be nervous. They may even stumble over every sentence. But somewhere inside them is a growing feeling that honesty could be the only thing left worth risking. And Leo, as these cards continue unfolding, it feels like this is only the beginning of what their heart has been trying to say. Something about the energy begins to shift the moment the Five of Swords slips onto the table. This doesn't feel like two people trying to win against each other. It feels like someone who believed that protecting their heart meant never letting you see how vulnerable they really were. So they chose silence. They chose distance. They chose to wait just a little longer, hoping somehow you would read everything they never had the courage to say. Yeah, people sometimes convince themselves that if someone truly loves them, they shouldn't have to ask. They shouldn't have to explain. They shouldn't have to risk rejection. But feelings don't always work that way. Hearts aren't mind readers. I keep seeing this image of someone staring at their phone late at night. They open your conversation. They type a sentence. They erase it. They lock the screen. A few minutes later, they unlock it again, only to repeat the exact same cycle. It almost became a habit, not because they enjoyed the uncertainty, but because every message carried the possibility of hearing something they weren't emotionally prepared for. The Seven of Swords quietly appears beside it, and honestly, this card doesn't feel deceptive in the obvious sense. It feels much more subtle. It's the version of ourselves that hides behind confidence when we're actually terrified. It's smiling while carrying questions that never leave our mind. It's pretending everything is under control while the heart keeps whispering someone else's name. This person may have tested the connection more than they realized, pulling away just to see if you would come closer, waiting for you to make the first move, hoping you would somehow prove that they mattered enough without them ever asking for reassurance. Okay, maybe you've experienced people like this before. They weren't trying to create a game. They were trying to avoid getting hurt. Unfortunately, the two often end up looking exactly the same. Leo, your energy feels remarkably different here. You didn't chase every silence. You didn't force every conversation. You simply continued being yourself. Warm, honest, open whenever it felt genuine. And strangely enough, that became the mirror they couldn't escape. Sometimes, the strongest person in the room isn't the loudest. Sometimes, it's the one who stays authentic while everyone else keeps wearing masks. Oh my God, that realization seems to land heavily as another card slowly reveals itself. The Five of Cups. I don't usually feel regret this deeply unless someone has spent a long time replaying choices they can no longer change. This feels like quiet mornings where they suddenly remember something you once said. Walking through a grocery store and passing a favorite snack that reminds them of you. Hearing a familiar song while driving home and feeling their entire chest tighten before they even understand why. Regret rarely arrives all at once. It collects in ordinary moments. One memory, one street, one empty chair, one birthday, one weekend they expected to forget you but somehow couldn't. They've begun noticing something they never paid attention to before. Every time they tried to control the connection, it became more fragile. Every time they stopped being genuine, they felt farther away from the very person they wanted to protect. You, on the other hand, kept choosing honesty, even when honesty wasn't easy. That difference has become impossible for them to ignore. The Devil card comes through almost like a whisper instead of a warning. I'm not feeling that this is about someone evil. It feels more like old patterns refusing to let go. Fear disguised as pride. Insecurity disguised as independence. Wounds disguised as confidence. Those patterns may have convinced them that staying emotionally unavailable was safer than risking disappointment. But safety has started feeling lonely. Really lonely. There are moments when they catch themselves wondering whether all those emotional walls actually protected anything at all. Because standing behind those walls also meant watching someone extraordinary slowly drift farther into the distance. And that thought, it stays with them much longer than they expected. I also keep sensing that they're beginning to understand something very simple, yet incredibly painful. Love was never asking them to become someone else. It was only asking them to stop hiding from themselves. That kind of realization doesn't happen overnight. It arrives quietly, usually after enough sleepless nights, enough unanswered questions, enough moments where pretending becomes more exhausting than telling the truth. The cards almost seem to pause here, as though they're making room for another layer of this story to unfold, one that reaches much deeper than regret alone. The room feels quieter as the Hermit finds its place among the cards. It's a different kind of silence than before. Not the silence people use to avoid a conversation, but the silence that appears after life has finally slowed someone down enough to hear their own thoughts. I keep feeling this image of somebody sitting alone with a cup of coffee that's already gone cold, staring out a window without really noticing what's outside. Their mind isn't in the present. It keeps wandering back to places where you still exist. It's strange how memory works, isn't it? Sometimes it isn't the big moments that return first. It's the ordinary ones. The drive home after spending time together. The way you laughed at something completely random. The little pauses in conversation that never felt uncomfortable because your presence was enough. Yeah, those are the moments that seem to visit this person the most. Distance has a way of removing distractions. Without constant noise around them, they can finally hear the questions they've been avoiding. Questions they used to silence with work, responsibilities, pride, or simply keeping themselves busy. But eventually, every distraction loses its power, and all that's left is honesty. The Judgment card arrives almost gently, like someone opening a curtain after a very long winter. I'm not seeing punishment here, I'm seeing realization. the kind that doesn't come because somebody forced it, but because the heart becomes ready to see what it couldn't recognize before. They've started asking themselves uncomfortable questions. What if I misunderstood someone who was actually trying to love me? What if I kept expecting Leo to prove something that never needed proving? What if I spent so much time protecting myself that I ended up walking away from the very person who felt like home? Okay, those questions don't always come with immediate answers. Sometimes they simply stay there, quietly reshaping the way a person sees everything that happened. The Six of Cups slips into the reading, and the atmosphere softens almost instantly. There is so much warmth surrounding your energy, Leo. It feels as though this person can no longer remember you through the lens of conflict. The arguments have faded, the misunderstandings have become quieter. What remains are the moments when they genuinely felt accepted. I keep seeing little snapshots instead of dramatic scenes, walking beside each other without needing to fill every silence, sharing food from the same plate, looking at each other for just a second longer than necessary before either of you looked away. Those memories seem to carry more weight now than they ever did in the moment. Funny how life does that. We often recognize the value of peace only after we've replaced it with loneliness. There's another feeling here that surprises me. I don't think this person is only grieving the relationship. I think they're grieving the version of themselves they could have been if fear hadn't been making so many decisions for them. That's a very different kind of sadness. It's one thing to miss somebody, it's another thing to realize you weren't fully present while you still had the chance. The cards become incredibly calm as the star appears. Honestly, this doesn't feel loud or dramatic. It feels like waking up one morning and noticing that your heart isn't fighting quite as hard as it used to. Healing rarely announces itself. It usually arrives in tiny moments that almost go unnoticed. Maybe this person no longer feels the need to blame everything outside themselves. Maybe they're beginning to understand that love isn't something to control. Maybe they're finally accepting that vulnerability isn't weakness. Whatever this shift is, it feels genuine because it isn't being rushed. Leo, your energy throughout all of this feels remarkably consistent. You didn't become someone else just because the connection became difficult. You didn't reshape your heart to fit someone else's fears. Looking back, that's one of the things this person admires most. You stayed true to yourself, even when it wasn't easy. Yeah, I think that realization has become impossible for them to ignore. There is also a quiet sense that forgiveness begins long before anyone says the words, "I'm sorry." Sometimes forgiveness begins the moment we understand why someone acted the way they did, even if it never made the pain disappear completely. That doesn't erase what happened. It simply allows compassion to exist beside disappointment. The energy almost feels lighter here, as though someone who has been walking through a long tunnel has finally noticed a small opening ahead. They may still have a distance to travel, but they're no longer walking without direction. Something inside them has changed, and that inner change seems ready to shape the way they see both you and the future that still lingers quietly between your two hearts. The energy becomes surprisingly gentle as the lover settles into the center of the reading. This doesn't feel like a dramatic confession or a sudden sweep off your feet. It feels much quieter than that. It's the kind of realization that grows slowly, almost without someone noticing, until one ordinary afternoon they look around and understand that every version of the future they imagine somehow has you standing in it. They may have spent a long time believing they needed someone exactly like themselves, someone who thought the same way, reacted the same way, carried the same habits and expectations. But life has a funny way of introducing us to people who don't fit the picture we thought we wanted. Instead, it hands us someone who quietly changes the picture altogether. Yeah, I keep hearing this thought repeating in their mind. We're different. But why does being with Leo feel more natural than trying to be understood by anyone else? That question seems to stay with them. Maybe your schedules never lined up perfectly. Maybe your personalities approached life from opposite directions. Maybe one of you spoke immediately, while the other needed time to process every emotion. Maybe one of you loved certainty, while the other trusted intuition. Whatever those differences looked like, They no longer feel like obstacles. They feel like pieces that somehow balance each other in ways neither of you could have predicted. The Temperance card quietly joins the reading, and the atmosphere feels almost peaceful. I don't sense someone trying to change you anymore. I don't sense them wishing you were different or easier to understand. Instead, there's this growing respect for the way your heart naturally moves through the world. Okay, imagine standing in a kitchen together while dinner is cooking. One person is talking about their day, the other is simply listening, smiling every now and then. Nothing extraordinary is happening. No grand declarations, no perfect movie scene, yet somehow it feels like home. That's the feeling surrounding this energy. Home isn't always a place. Sometimes it's simply the person who allows you to stop pretending. I also feel like this person has begun noticing something they overlooked before. Every difference between you became an opportunity to learn instead of something to argue about. Your confidence encouraged them to trust themselves a little more. Their caution may have reminded you to slow down when life became overwhelming. Neither of you completed the other because you were incomplete. You simply brought out qualities that had been waiting patiently beneath the surface. Oh my God, that's beautiful. Because real connection often feels less like finding perfection and more like discovering peace. The Two of Cups appears, and everything softens again. This card almost feels like two people meeting each other for the first time. Even after they've already known one another for quite a while, it's as though this person is finally seeing you without fear, standing between their eyes and their heart. They remember the conversations that felt effortless, the moments when you laughed before either of you realized why something was funny, the comfortable silence during a drive with music playing quietly in the background, the way you naturally celebrated their victories without making everything about yourself. Those little moments have become much bigger in hindsight. Funny enough, they aren't remembering expensive gifts or impressive gestures. They're remembering how safe your energy felt, how peaceful your presence became after difficult days, how you somehow made ordinary moments feel meaningful without even trying. I think they've started asking themselves a completely different question. Instead of wondering whether this relationship could work, they're wondering why they spent so much time believing it couldn't. That shift changes everything. The Hierophant slowly reveals itself, bringing a feeling of stability that wasn't here before. I'm sensing someone whose idea of commitment has quietly matured. Maybe there was a time when responsibility felt restrictive. Maybe building a future sounded overwhelming because they were still trying to understand themselves. Life has a way of changing our priorities. The things that once seemed exciting begin to lose their shine. The constant chasing, the endless uncertainty, the emotional guessing games. None of those seem as appealing anymore. What feels valuable is consistency, knowing who you'll call when something wonderful happens, knowing whose voice can calm your thoughts after a difficult day, knowing there's someone beside you who isn't trying to compete with your light, but simply enjoys watching you shine. Leo, I honestly feel this person has stopped measuring your differences as reasons to stay apart. They've started seeing those same differences as the reason both of you kept growing, even during the seasons when life pulled you onto separate paths. There is something incredibly sincere unfolding here, not rushed, not forced, just quietly becoming clearer with every passing day, almost like someone assembling pieces of a puzzle they've been carrying for years before finally realizing the picture has always been leading back to the same heart. A quiet pause settles over the reading as the Hanged Man gently reveals itself. This feels less like waiting and more like waking up. You know those moments when life doesn't change overnight, but the way you see it suddenly does? I keep sensing that's exactly where this person is. They're looking at the same memories, the same connection, the same version of you, yet everything feels different because they're finally looking without fear leading the way. It's almost like someone cleaning out an old closet. They pick up things they haven't touched in years and quietly ask themselves, why was I holding on to this? Except these aren't old clothes, they're old beliefs, old defenses, old stories they kept telling themselves about why love had to be complicated. Yeah, maybe they once believed vulnerability meant losing control. Maybe they thought asking for reassurance made them weak. Maybe they convinced themselves that keeping people at a distance was the safest way to protect their heart. Those ideas don't seem to fit anymore. Little by little, they're beginning to fall away. I keep seeing this ordinary image of someone driving home after work with the radio turned off. No distractions, no phone calls, just their own thoughts filling the silence. Instead of blaming circumstances or wondering what everyone else expects from them, they're asking a much simpler question. What actually makes me happy? Funny enough, that question seems to lead back to you more often than they expected. The Wheel of Fortune enters the reading with such gentle movement that it almost feels like the wind changing direction. Nothing dramatic, just life slowly opening doors that once seemed permanently closed. Sometimes we spend years trying to fit into places where we were never meant to stay. Trying to earn approval, trying to satisfy expectations, trying to become the version of ourselves that keeps everyone comfortable. Oh my God, that can be exhausting. I feel this person becoming tired of living according to everyone else's opinions. Maybe family had expectations. Maybe friends had something to say. Maybe people around them believed they knew what was best. But none of those voices had to live inside this person's heart every single day. Only they do. And for the first time in a long while, it feels like they're beginning to trust that inner voice instead of drowning it out. Leo, your energy almost acts like a quiet reminder here, not because you've been convincing them to change, but because your authenticity showed them another way to live. You never needed to perform happiness for anyone. You simply carried yourself with honesty, even when life wasn't easy. That example stayed with them, probably more than either of you realized. The Nine of Wands appears, and I smile a little because this doesn't feel like giving up. It feels like someone lowering their emotional armor after wearing it for far too long. Imagine carrying a heavy backpack every single day until one afternoon you finally take it off. At first, your shoulders almost don't know how to feel without the weight. That's what this energy reminds me of. They're discovering that constantly protecting themselves has been far more exhausting than opening their heart ever could be. Healing isn't making them fearless, it's making them honest. There's a difference. They may still have moments where old doubts return. They may still question whether they'll be accepted exactly as they are. But those fears no longer seem to be making every decision for them. Instead, they're beginning to choose something much more meaningful. Peace. I also feel them becoming less interested in pleasing everyone around them. You know how sometimes people spend so much time trying not to disappoint others that they slowly disappear from their own lives? This person seems to recognize that pattern now. They're realizing that sacrificing their happiness never truly created harmony. It only created distance between who they were and who they wanted to become. The cards seem to brighten as Ten of Cups quietly settles into place. Honestly, this energy feels beautifully ordinary, and I mean that in the best possible way. I don't immediately see grand romantic gestures. I see Sunday mornings, coffee shared across a kitchen table, laughing over something completely insignificant, planning holidays months in advance, walking through a grocery store and arguing playfully over what to cook for dinner. There's something deeply comforting about the future they're beginning to imagine. Not perfect, simply real. A life where they don't have to hide parts of themselves anymore. A relationship where honesty feels safer than pretending. Leo, I think they're starting to understand that happiness isn't found by becoming the person everyone expects. It's found by standing beside someone who allows you to become more fully yourself. That realization feels incredibly important because reconciliation doesn't seem to begin with words here. It begins with inner change. It begins when someone quietly decides they're no longer willing to abandon their own heart just to avoid disappointing the world around them. The energy keeps moving with remarkable softness, almost as if one final conversation has been waiting patiently for exactly this version of them to finally be ready to speak. Something feels wonderfully grounded as the King of Pentacles comes forward. After everything this connection has carried, this card doesn't arrive with loud promises or dramatic speeches. It feels like someone finally understanding that love isn't measured by what stays hidden inside the heart. It's measured by what we're willing to build, protect, and show up for every single day. I keep seeing this person standing in front of a conversation they've imagined hundreds of times. They've rehearsed the words while driving alone. They've whispered them under their breath while making coffee in the morning. They've even started talking to you in their mind, only to stop halfway through because they weren't sure if they deserved to be heard. Yeah, guilt has a strange way of following people. It doesn't usually shout. It lingers in the quiet moments. The empty seat across the table, the message they never sent. The celebration that somehow felt incomplete because the one person they wanted to share it with wasn't there. I don't think this apology is coming from someone who simply wants to feel better about themselves. It feels like someone who has finally accepted that their pride protected nothing. If anything, it only delayed the happiness they had been searching for all along. There is a softness surrounding this energy that wasn't present before. They're no longer trying to explain every choice they made or defend every mistake. Instead, I hear something much simpler. I know I hurt you. I know you didn't deserve that. I know I let fear speak louder than love. Sometimes those few sentences carry more healing than 1,000 explanations. The world quietly unfolds across the reading, and I honestly get emotional here because it feels like someone reaching the end of a long journey inside themselves. Not the end of the story, just the end of an old version of who they used to be. Life has been teaching them things they couldn't have learned any other way. Patience, humility, honesty, the courage to admit when they were wrong. Oh my God, those lessons rarely come easily. They usually arrive after enough nights of wondering what could have been, after enough mornings pretending everything is fine, after enough moments where success in every other part of life still couldn't fill the space one person left behind. Leo, I feel your energy here almost like sunlight coming through an open window. You didn't spend all this time trying to become unforgettable. You simply remained genuine, and that's exactly why they couldn't replace you. People often think they're searching for someone better, but eventually they realize they were actually searching for the feeling they only experienced with one person. That's what this energy reminds me of. The Ace of Cups appears with such tenderness that the room almost feels lighter. This doesn't feel like trying to recreate the past. It feels like approaching the future with a different heart. Imagine planting a new garden in the same place where flowers once stopped growing. You don't stand there wishing yesterday could return. You prepare the soil differently. You water it differently. You understand more than you did before. That's how this connection feels. Not repeating old patterns, creating new ones. I also sense this person no longer measuring love by who texts first, who has more control, or who wins an argument. Those things seem incredibly small compared to what they actually want. What they want is consistency. To laugh without wondering if tomorrow everything will disappear. To make plans without expecting disappointment. To wake up knowing they don't have to hide the truth anymore. The cards almost glow as the sun rises at the end of the reading. There's something beautifully uncomplicated about this energy. Happiness doesn't always arrive wrapped in extraordinary moments. Sometimes it's simply two people deciding to stop carrying yesterday into every tomorrow. I can almost picture them imagining ordinary days with you, making breakfast while music plays softly in the background, walking through a farmer's market on a Saturday morning, arguing playfully over which movie to watch before falling asleep halfway through it anyway, growing older without feeling the need to wear emotional armor every single day. Those little images seem to mean everything to them, because for the first time, they're beginning to understand that a peaceful life isn't boring, it's precious. Leo, whatever path this connection chooses from here, I hope these cards remind you of something important. Your kindness was never weakness. Your honesty was never something to apologize for. The way you loved reflected who you are, and that light deserves to be met with someone willing to stand in it, rather than run from it. If another chapter is waiting beyond this one, it will likely ask for something very different than before. Not perfection, not certainty, just two hearts that have learned enough about themselves to finally recognize the quiet beauty of choosing each other, one day at a time. Thank you so much for sharing this moment with me, Leo. I truly appreciate your time and your beautiful energy. Take what resonates, leave behind what doesn't, and trust your own intuition above everything else. You are so important to me, and I can't wait to spend more time with you in the next reading. Until then, take gentle care of yourself. Bye for now.